Good evening and welcome to Story Hour. I'm tonight's host, Laura Blackwell. My co-host, Daniel Marcus, started the very first Story Hour over a year ago so that we could all just gather around the same little virtual fireside and tell stories like humans have always done. And over a year later, I find myself coming back to that little campfire every week. And it's great to see so many of you here again. So welcome to those of you returning, and welcome to those of you joining us for the first time as well. As always, we have two writers reading for their favorite nonprofits. Today we have I think this may be the first time we've had a repeat of the same author pairing, which is kind of exciting, but they have such great energy together. It's going to be super cool. So you've probably guessed already that I'm talking about Jordan Kurella and Mina Li. So if you are fortunate enough to help others during this time, please consider a donation to one or both of tonight's featured nonprofits, the Kaleidoscope Youth Center, Ohio, or the Michigan Taiwanese American Organization. Mina Li is reading for the Michigan Taiwanese American Organization. The MTAO is a nonprofit organization founded in 2002 to promote cultural exchanges between Michigan residents and Taiwanese Americans through a variety of community events, including concerts, film screenings, lectures, traditional puppet performances, and more. You can learn more at mitaiaa.weebly.com. I'll also drop that link in the chat. And check them out. They've got some really fun stuff going on. Jordan Kurella is reading for Kaleidoscope Youth Center, Ohio. This intentional, expressive queer youth community is completely youth-led, meaning everything you'll find in the center is designed for and by young people. KYC's diverse, experienced staff work alongside queer youth to create free programming, housing, and support services all over the state of Ohio. You can learn more at kycohio.org. If you are here with us on Zoom, please feel free to leave your camera on. It's really nice to be able to make eye contact with the audience and chime in on the text chat if you like. It can get quite lively. If you're joining us on Facebook, thank you, but please be patient with us because we may not be seeing your messages in real time. So it's time for our first reader tonight, and our first reader tonight is going to be Mina Li, and bear with me just a moment because my printout went missing, and I want to make sure to tell you everything you need to know about Mina. I mean, first off, obviously, she's really awesome and she writes great stories, and that's why she's here. But there's more that you may not have known. So here we go. Mina Li is a Taiwanese American author born and bred in Ann Arbor, Michigan. More of her work can be seen in An Alphabet of Embers, Kaleidotrope, Robot Dinosaurs, and Remapping Wonderland. Why is this thing being so hard? Remapping Wonderland, classic fairy tales retold by people of color. When she's not writing, she likes to cook, knit, and take walks in her neighborhood. Mina, welcome. Thank you for being patient while I made sure that I had your bio right.
You got it right. Perfect.
Oh, what story have you brought for us tonight?
So I thought I'd read from the Remapping Wonderland anthology, right here.
That cover's beautiful. Yep.
And you can get it at Alternating Current Press. I think they take PayPal. Let's see. It's $14.99. You get my story. You get a bunch of like even cooler stories. But the story I'm going to read today is it's a retelling of The Little Mermaid. It has a Taiwanese American deuteragonist. I don't know if I pronounced that right. We did not go over this when I was in my English classes in college. But yeah, so this was the very first story I wrote and submitted back in 2014, and it didn't get accepted for a while. And I just like to use this as a way to tell people, don't self-reject. Because I think I submitted the story over and over and over again, and it kept getting rejected. And then Alternating Current thought, hey, we like this. Let's publish it, and here we are.
That's great. I'm excited to hear it. Now, is anybody else finding Mina a little soft tonight, or is it just my ears being funny? A little soft?
A little
Can
bit.
you move up to your mic a little bit more? Just a touch more? Sorry to be asking this live. I'm very organized today.
Yeah, I think the thing is that I was trying to angle my camera.
I think that's better already.
A little flattering, and well, all right. I do not think this is a great angle, but I also don't think people came here to look at me, so.
Well, your hair looks great, but I'm here mostly to hear the story, honestly.
All right. Apologies in advance for how my chin looks then, but we'll begin. So content warnings, first of all. This is a retelling of The Little Mermaid. So there is attempted suicide. There is body horror. There is microaggressions and there are racist microaggressions. That's really all I can think of at the moment. Those are the big ones. So I see it's 10:05. So should I just start? All right, let's get settled in. Francesca barely managed to keep it together when she left Professor Bergman's seminar. Oh, by the way, I should have read the title. I'm sorry. It's called The Things That Keep Us. It's Mercury. It's the end of Mercury retrograde. What can I say? Anyway, Francesca barely managed to keep it together when she left Professor Bergman's seminar. By the time she was outside, tears were running down her face, and when she sat down on the ledge of the campus greens fountain, she was outright sobbing. Class had been humiliating beyond belief. She'd come in prepared with a few thoughts on the assigned reading, figuring that was enough. Normally, she kept quiet because she didn't have much to add, but for this class, 15% of the grade was based on participation. Francesca wasn't thrilled about it, but she didn't want to be by default either. She had raised her hand right at the beginning of class, the sooner to get things over with. The class discussion was supposed to take off from there. Instead, what had happened was Professor Bergman asking her, "Do you really think that's what the author intended, Francesca?" Followed by 10 minutes of questioning, more fit for an interrogation than a mid-level English class. She didn't know which was worse, being forced to read the relevant passages out loud, or Professor Bergman asking her if things were the same in China. She'd been so stunned that she couldn't even squeak out, "I'm not from China." What do I do now, she thought. She wanted to stare Professor Bergman down and tell him off with as much chill as she could muster. And then she would have sat down, or maybe flounced out in triumph, to the roaring applause of her classmates. Instead, she was fumbling in her backpack for tissues to wipe her eyes and nose. A balled-up wad of Kleenex sat at the bottom of the bag, squashed next to a pencil case, and Francesca was taking it out when someone tapped her shoulder. "What?" she snapped. She looked to see who was bothering her, and suddenly her anger evaporated, shock rushing into its place. He was a scrawny, skinny thing who had never seen the sun, given the waxy pallor of his skin. Looking at him, Francesca didn't think so much of white as she did colorless, as if he were an unfinished painting or all done in monochrome. His clothes were comically oversized, his t-shirt hanging in baggy folds on his bony shoulders, and his dark mop of hair needed trimming. Francesca found herself moving backward to put more distance between them. He held up the phone and tapped the screen. "Are you all right?" it read. What? I don't," she stammered, trying not to shake. When he tapped the screen again, the anger flared up once more. It took over. "What do you think? Do I look all right to you?" She swiped at her nose, leaving a trail of snot down the back of her hand. "Do I?" The guy shook his head, and then he turned back to his phone, painstakingly typing out letters one by one. Francesca got up to leave, but he caught her wrist before she could walk away. His fingers were so cold they hurt, and she hissed in pain as she wrenched herself free. As she rubbed her wrist, He held up the phone again. What's wrong? None of your business, Francesca was about to say, but when she looked at him, she saw nothing but open sincerity on his face. That show of sympathy made him less unnerving, although she didn't come any closer. His eyes were large and inhumanly pale, touched with the barest hint of green, and looking into them for even a second made Francesca shudder. It's my professor, she said, wiping off her hand. She might as well tell him, given that her parents weren't going to listen. With Mom's, Fran, you need to swallow your anger, and Dad's, look, Fran, sometimes you need to lower your expectations of people. He says I don't talk enough in class, but he thinks it's because I'm not from here, like I can't speak English or something. And it's just, where do you get off making assumptions like that? Seriously. He gazed at her for a moment, and then went back to typing on his phone. Where are you from? It read. I'm from here, Francesca yelled, exasperated. I was born here, for God's sake, and I grew up here. He's got it all wrong, okay? I mean, how would you like it if I asked you where you were from? You know, like you didn't belong here. The guy gave her a curious look, and then bent his head back over his phone, typing away. Francesca hitched up her backpack, ready to leave for real this time, when he held up the phone again. What if I told you I came from the sea? It had been a violent summer storm that overturned the human woman's skiff, her red hair shining against the turbulent blacks and grays of the ocean, as the current dragged her under. He had swum to her, catching her before the waves dashed her against the rocks, wondering faintly as he did why he was rescuing such a foolish human. Her eyes had fluttered open as he carried her through the water. If the storm hadn't made his heart skip a beat, that did. By the time he'd gotten her safely on land, she was stirring, and he'd left her quickly after that, afraid that his appearance would frighten her. He'd sought help from the witch soon after that. I want to go to her, he'd said, but I can't, not like this. He gestured at his fishtail. Will you help me? Is she worth it? The witch had asked. Yes, he'd said, even when told that the magic was irreversible, that there would be pain, that if he didn't win her love by the full moon, he would dissolve into foam. The only thing that had made him hesitate was what she'd asked for in exchange. His voice, the best thing he possessed for such powerful magic. It would have to do, he'd decided, because otherwise he would live out the rest of his life knowing he could have gone and found the red-haired woman if he'd only been brave enough. And so a bargain had been struck. There had been pain from the beginning, moments after he'd pulled himself from the river that ran near the woman's home. The witch's draft had stung his throat as he drank it down, followed by his tail tearing in two with a sharp cracking sound. He tried to push the two halves back together, but it had been too late. Scales flaked off in glittering clumps while his fins shriveled before his eyes. The last thing he remembered before fainting was the sensation of choking as his gills fused shut. When he finally come to, the red-haired woman had been there, her relieved smile one of the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. It made up for the unexpected pain of living on land. In the sea, he'd been weightless, able to swim long distances effortlessly. Up here, the thin air couldn't support him, and he wasn't used to his own heaviness. On land, each step sent stabbing pains into his feet, and he was forced to stop frequently to rest. Everything was so much harsher, too, light and color so bright they hurt, and the sounds of human conversations made him wince. Now that the sun was lower in the sky, the cool breezes and muted light made things better than they'd been that morning. There was a fountain ahead, and the need for water washing against his skin was so great that he hobbled over, ignoring the way his feet throbbed and ached. That was when he found the girl, weeping on the ledge. At first, he left her alone, but the more she cried, the more worried he became. So he'd taken the phone Cynthia, the red-haired woman, had given him and approached the weeping girl. At first, she was frightened, then angry, and now her face was blank with confusion, seeing his last message. What if I told you I came from the sea? Matthew! The sound of Cynthia's voice rang out, cutting off any reply the girl might have had. Matthew was the name Cynthia had given him. He didn't mind, not when she'd chosen it. His real name was unpronounceable by human tongues anyway. Cynthia ran toward him with hurried steps. There you are, she said. I was looking all over for you. Sorry, the meeting with my advisor ran longer than I thought. You scared me wandering off like that. Matthew bowed his head in apology. He'd meant to wait for Cynthia inside, but the fountain had looked so tempting from the window, even though he'd been on land for less than a day. He glanced over his shoulder to tell the girl goodbye, but she was already walking away from the fountain. Cynthia laughed, pushing her thick glasses back into place. That's okay. Come on now. Her hand wrapped around his, soft and smooth. I'm up to my eyeballs in dissertation rewrites, but once that's done, we can watch TV together. Sound good? It was only a matter of time, he thought, nodding back. If he'd had any doubts that she would tell him she loved him, in that moment he knew the words would come soon. Her confession would make the witch's magic take full effect. Without it, he would die. But the way she tugged him away from the fountain, and the warmth of her hand around his own, made that fate seem like nothing so much as an empty threat. Matthew saw the girl again the next time he was at the fountain, sitting on the steps of a nearby building. On one chubby knee was an instrument he'd never seen before, a small octagonal box with a long neck, topped with two large pegs. The girl drew a long stick between two strings running from top to bottom, making a music unmatched by anything he'd ever heard in the sea. Her fingers were short and blunt, and yet they moved along the strings with well-practiced ease. Shyly, he approached, waiting for her to finish. In the meantime, he took out his phone, ready to type a message. Cynthia had given it to him, a way to find each other, as she'd put it. Matthew liked having a connection that belonged to the two of them, even if she was too busy to spend as much time with him as he might have liked. During the day, she rushed about in a flurry of papers and flowing skirts. At night, she was at her desk, surrounded by books, a mug of coffee always in reach, fingers flying as she typed her dissertation. Matthew had tried to tell Cynthia where he'd come from, but she'd only given him a pitying smile and a pat on the arm before going back to grading her papers. Poor guy, she'd murmured. If only we could find some ID. Matthew had never felt the loss of his voice so keenly before. I came from the sea, he wanted to shout. I came from the sea, the only home I've ever known. It's all so I could find you. I gave up my tail and my voice to be by your side. With each passing day, he grew increasingly aware of how his time was running out. Last night, the moon was already a half circle. How would he get Cynthia to fall in love with him if she didn't even listen to him in the first place? At least, the girl looked like she might have understood. When her song ended, he greeted her with a wave, and then held up the phone. I like your music, he typed. It reminded him of his lost voice, the way the notes wrung his soul, the way it made his blood ebb and flow like the tides. If only he could find a way to charm Cynthia the same way this charmed him. Oh, said the girl, surprised. Thanks, I guess. She scratched the back of her neck, her broad brown cheeks flushing red. Her limp hair was tied back with a fluffy pink flower the same shade as her tunic. She peered at him warily, but at least she wasn't actively recoiling like before. My name's Matthew, he wrote next. What's yours? Me, she asked, pointing to herself. She let out an awkward laugh at Matthew's impatient nod. There was nobody else nearby, after all. Francesca, she said, offering a hand. Her skin was warm and slightly dusty, and her grip solid, even if her eyes didn't quite meet his own. Francesca was a name that sounded crisp and brittle at the edges. It suited her, matching the way she bit off the ends of her words when she talked. What is that? Matthew asked, pointing to her instrument. Francesca reached for his phone. With quicker thumbs than his, she typed out the word "Arahu," and then said it aloud. It's from Taiwan, where my parents are from, she explained. Matthew stared at her, confused, beckoning her to return the phone. But you said you were from here, he typed. I am, she said. My parents came over here and had me, so I'm from here. But they wanted to pass on the way things were done over there, like, the music. Matthew felt yet another pang of regret for his lost voice, for he had so many questions that he ached with the weight of them. How had her parents adjusted to life here? How did they manage to pass their culture and their lives down to her? He tried to imagine having children of his own. How could he teach them to ride the currents, or show them the great coral reefs and shipwrecks without a tail? How could he recite all 100 generations of their lineage, or sing the songs, all those songs, without his voice? With shaking hands, he managed to type in "how," holding up his phone for Francesca to see. Francesca glanced at the phone and then stared at Matthew for a long time. He gazed back, silently willing her to understand his desperation. Finally, she leaned back with a sigh, dusting off her hands on the frilly hem of her tunic, and Matthew saw that her eyes were not actually black as he'd first supposed, but a deep, warm brown. Bit of a long story, she said. Are you free tomorrow? Francesca had never skipped school before. There were times when she had called in sick, but she felt guilty anyway, especially when she wound up feeling perfectly fine after a nap. And yet, knowing that she was missing Professor Bergman's class, she didn't care at all. In fact, it seemed right being outside on a sunny day instead of being cooped up in a classroom. She recognized Matthew, walking toward her as if every step were made on sharp gravel and broken glass. As he got closer, she noticed that there were small flecks on his knees and calves that shimmered translucent violet and aquamarine in the light, almost like fish scales, she thought. She shut her eyes, but the flecks were still there when she opened them again. Hey there, she said out loud. Are you okay? She pointed to his legs. Matthew nodded, waving her question off as if to say, it's nothing. Then he gestured vaguely toward Francesca, his eyes questioning. She didn't understand until he pointed at his own back for emphasis. My backpack? Oh, Francesca shook her head. I'm not going to class today. I don't want to. She grinned, feeling delightfully naughty. Matthew cocked an eyebrow at her, then took out his phone. Cynthia hates it when students don't go to her class, he typed. Cynthia? Francesca asked. Matthew went back to his phone, and Francesca noticed he'd gotten faster, no longer picking out the letters one by one. She also noticed that along both sides of his neck, half hidden by his unruly hair, there were 3 raised pink lines. Maybe they're gills, she thought, or they were gills, and now they're closed over. The words, what if I told you I came from the sea, resurfaced in her mind. Finally, Matthew held up his phone. The one I came here for, he typed. I left the sea for her. But she doesn't understand. She doesn't believe me. He shrugged, as if saying, oh well, but his eyes were dull, his smile forced. It reminded Francesca of the previous night, when he'd sidled up to her when she was playing her arhul. He'd looked so out of place, so lost, much more vulnerable than she'd originally thought. I believe you, she blurted. When Matthew stared blankly at her, she added, you're kind of like me. You don't look like you're from here either. It sounded mean, but it was true. She didn't look like she was American. And as for Matthew, well, from his unnaturally pale skin to the scales on his legs, he looked as out of place as she did. I'm sorry, she finally said. It's just, Matthew stopped her with a hand on her arm, giving her a reassuring smile. Yeah, Francesca said. Yeah, okay. Why don't we get going? At the library, Matthew insisted on taking the stairs, despite Francesca's offer to use the elevators. He didn't like the sudden vertigo that came from being pulled up or down while standing still. They stopped on the 6th floor, crammed edge to edge with bookshelves. The air smelled sweet and musty, and there was that odd sound between ringing and buzzing that was ever present in these places. Matthew wondered if it came from the lights. He'd seen one flickering when he was sitting in Cynthia's class, complaining as if it was angry with him. Francesca wandered along the shelves, searching. Here we go, she said, delving between 2 of them. Matthew followed, watching her skim the endless rows of books until she stopped with a little aha, raising herself on her toes to pull out a book large enough to topple her. She sat cross-legged on the floor, opening the book on her lap. As Matthew crouched next to her, he saw there were hardly any words. It looked familiar, though he didn't quite understand why. This, said Francesca, is a map of the world. She pointed to one of the shapes to the left of the split between the 2 pages. This is where we are. Matthew remembered then that he had seen a map before in a half-submerged shipwreck, so old and yellowed with age that it had become part of the desk it lay on. He noticed that some parts of the sea had been divided and marked with names. That surprised him because, as far as he knew, there was only one giant sea upon which the land rested. He peered closer, trying to find the ridge that was characteristic of the area where he'd lived, but he couldn't see any such place marked. Where did you say your parents were from? He asked. Francesca moved her finger to the right, across the split, some of the sea, and a large landmass, stopping at a small island. They're from Taiwan, right here. Pretty far, huh? Matthew nodded. That would mean her parents had had to cross the sea to get to where they were now. It was far when he thought about it. The swim all the way here hadn't taken too long since this place wasn't that far inland. Did they speak this language? He typed next. No, Francesca says. Well, I mean, they learned a little, but not a lot. Not until they came here. And even now it's not perfect. But, you know, I can speak their language too, so it works. I've even got a different name. What is it? Matthew asked. Francesca took a scrap of paper and a pen from her purse and wrote, Fu Lan. Fu Lan, she said. That's my Chinese name. Not my real name, but I guess I still answer to it. Matthew smiled. Matthew's not my real name either, he offered. The corners of Francesca's mouth turned up wryly. Somehow, I didn't think it was. What is your real name anyway? Francesca asked a few days later. She and Matthew sat together in a cafe that was empty, save for a few people hunched over their laptops. Today was the second time she skipped Professor Bergman's class, and truth be told, she had no intention of returning. Matthew slid his phone across the table. Humans wouldn't be able to say it, he typed. Really? Francesca asked, sliding the phone back. How do you know this language, then? I listened to people on ships when I went to the surface, found words in old shipwrecks. Huh. Well, could you tell me what your name means? Matthew picked up his phone, about to type, but put it back down, his fingers tapping on the wooden table. Then he picked it up again and started typing. It means swift currents, he replied. There's different kinds in the sea, slow or fast, warm or cold. Fast currents mean I swim fast. Fast currents are warm, too. Francesca raised an eyebrow, but all Matthew did was shrug. Then he pointed to her as if to say, your turn now. Me? You mean my real name or the one my parents call me at home? The one your parents call you. You mean Fulan? The first character means lucky, and then the last one means blue. So, lucky blue, I guess. Francesca smiled sheepishly. It's not really supposed to mean anything, though. My parents just liked the way it sounded. Matthew shot her a bemused look, thumbs working away. What kind of blue? The screen read. There are many kinds of blue in the sea. She was about to answer when someone coughed to her left. Ah, Francesca, said Professor Bergman, swinging into review. I didn't see you in class today. Francesca's face burned, but she said nothing, instead focusing on Professor Bergman's ludicrous paisley tie. Look, I'm concerned, Professor Bergman continued. Whatever's going on with you, we can work it out, but you've got to tell me first, all right? You don't have to worry about losing face, like in China. Oh my God, I'm not from China, Francesca snapped. Professor Bergman opened his mouth to say something, but she sprang to her feet, smacking her palms on the table. I was born in Illinois, okay? English is my first language. I don't know why you think I'm not from here, but that's the problem. That's what's going on. With that, she pushed past him and bolted from the cafe. He was shouting her name as she left, but she didn't care. She knew she'd been rude, but one more word from his ignorant mouth, and she would have thrown her chair at him. Someone grabbed her elbow from behind, and she spun around, ready to slug Professor Bergman. Instead, she found Matthew, his chest heaving with exertion, wincing as he limped closer. His hold loosened on her arm as she reached for his phone. Sorry, Francesca said. I thought you were him. It was warm out, still smelling faintly of summer, and she realized that she was shaking. I'm okay. I think I am. I don't know. She covered her mouth with both hands, taking deep breaths. Matthew's hand moved up to her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. He typed on his phone, slow and awkward, with only one hand, and then held it up for Francesca to see. So that's why you don't go to class, it read. Yeah, said Francesca. Her voice was choked with tears, and she kept her eyes wide open, staring straight ahead to try and keep them from falling. She didn't need a nervous breakdown, not right now. Matthew lifted her chin, tilting her head up to meet his gaze before holding up the phone once more. You didn't deserve that, he typed. Francesca was so relieved by his words that she began to sob in earnest. Matthew stayed close by Francesca as they left the registrar's office. She stopped crying, but now she was chewing her lips so hard he expected her to draw blood any second. In her hands was the form they'd given her to drop the class, the edges already wrinkled from how hard she was gripping the pages. I have to go get Professor Bergman's signature. Can you believe it? She muttered. Matthew nodded, and then decided to change the subject. You never told me what kind of blue your name meant. Oh, yeah. Francesca's brows knitted as she considered his question. I don't know. It's just blue. I mean, there's a word for light blue, but it also means green. But that's it, she shrugged. Sorry. You probably have hundreds of names for one shade of blue alone. That's true. Tell me about them. So he did, bit by bit. Francesca waited patiently as he picked out every word on his phone, telling her everything he'd wanted to tell Cynthia, the shipwrecks he'd found, where the water was so black he'd had to rely on the scant phosphorescence to see, the time he'd dared to swim closer to shore and seen Cynthia for the first time, nearly swallowed by the undertow, the bargain he'd made with the witch. He didn't tell her about what would happen if Cynthia didn't fall for him. There was no point in agitating her again when she'd only just calmed down. I miss my voice the most, he confessed. I miss it more than I miss my tale. I miss singing so badly. I wanted to sing to Cynthia when I met her, and now I can't even talk. Bet you had a really nice voice, Francesca said. I did, Matthew wrote. That's why I had to give it up. Can you get it back? Matthew shook his head. I can't go back to the sea either, he wrote. Francesca kept quiet for a long time, smoothing out the creases she'd made in the form. A group of boys passed them as they exited the building, and Matthew ignored the blatant stares aimed at him. Wow, she murmured, running her hand over her face. I'm sorry, I don't even know what to say. Matthew smiled. I don't regret it, he wrote. I wanted to see her more than anything. If you want someone to see you, you have to let them know you're there. You've got guts, you know that? I don't think I could ever go that far for someone I liked. They were interrupted by Cynthia darting toward them, her blue eyes wide with excitement. Matthew, come here. There's someone I want you to meet. A woman followed not far behind her, hands in her pockets and wearing a smile like she found the entire world amusing. Matthew watched as the newcomer twined a copper-brown arm around Cynthia's and kissed her on the cheek. The pain in his legs flared up, sharper than ever, as he made his way over. A sick emptiness filled him as he realized that although Cynthia was so close, she was now impossible to reach. He managed to shake the woman's hand despite the choking sorrow he felt. Last night the moon had been a bright, bulging oval in the sky. His time had run out. He walked alongside the two of them, listening to Cynthia's chattering. Found by the river naked, no ID, nothing. He told me he came from the sea. Can you believe that? I looked up the missing persons directory, and there's nobody matching his description. Matthew glanced over his shoulder, only to see Francesca, her eyes full of pity. Francesca's parents had taken her decision better than she'd thought they would. They weren't happy about a late drop, but after she assured them that her GPA wouldn't be affected, they accepted it. Dad hadn't even given her the speech about how she had to lower her expectations. She still had to get Professor Bergman's signature, but it would be worth it. Besides, it was nothing compared to what Matthew had to deal with. Francesca felt terrible for even complaining to him in the first place. Next to what he'd sacrificed, all for Cynthia, and to have that destroyed? Who cared about a crappy professor? She'd wanted to grab Cynthia and scream at her. At least she could have listened. Thinking about it now made her so angry that she almost snapped the strings on her arhu while tuning it. When Matthew turned up, she sighed in relief. Hey, she said, you doing okay? Matthew nodded, but when Francesca didn't break her gaze, he shook his head and sank down next to her, burying his face in his arms. It reminded Francesca of time-lapse movies when plants withered and died. I'm sorry, she said, giving him a consoling pat on the back. Is there anything I can do? He didn't answer for a while, but when Francesca was about to repeat the question, he took out his phone and typed, Play a song, any song. Are you sure? She asked, and was answered with a small nod. The song seemed so insignificant in the face of what had happened, but if there was anything better to offer, she hadn't a clue. All right, a song it is, she said. She took up her bow and began to play Green Island Serenade, a song her mother had often sung to her as a baby. It was a simple tune, one she'd taught herself, and even though there wasn't anything fancy save for a few trills, it was one of her favorites. She always felt better after playing it and hoped Matthew might feel the same. Matthew didn't move until the last note faded away. Then he got to his feet, and Francesca saw an eerie, final resignation on his face. Thank you, Francesca, he wrote. I'm glad we met. Hey, wait, she said. Are you sure you're okay? You worry too much, Matthew typed. Dissolving into foam terrified Matthew, right up to the moment he threw himself into the river. Where would he start unraveling? The fingertips, maybe, or would the bubbles spread outward from his chest? He plunged into the water, telling himself that dying would be like returning home. Even if he didn't have his voice or his tail, he would spend his last moments in familiar surroundings, not in that cruel upper world full of bitterness. All he wanted was a peaceful, painless death. But the water refused him even this. It rushed into his nose and mouth, making his temples burn, and he realized with awful clarity that he was no longer suited for life underwater, no more than he had been for life on land. Matthew's lungs began to ache, and he figured he was dissolving from the inside out, the way bubbles were streaming from his mouth. That was better. Otherwise, he'd have to watch himself disappear, and this way would be quicker since nobody could live without lungs and a heart. It would be over soon. Suddenly, someone's arms wrapped around his waist, hauling him out of the water. He struggled against them, but without the strength he possessed in his old life, he could only let himself be dragged back to shore. What the hell, Matthew, his rescuer snapped, and he saw Francesca wringing out her hair. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone so he could explain, but the screen was dark. Francesca snorted. Your phone's broken, she said. Don't you know you're not supposed to get it wet? God, don't tell me you decided to kill yourself because of her. Matthew looked away guiltily. You wouldn't understand, he wanted to say. God damn it, Francesca hissed. She grabbed Matthew's shoulders, her grip tight enough to hurt. But it was a reassuring kind of pain, as if she were keeping him in this body, grounding him. Look at me. Slowly, he turned to face her. Her face was half hidden in the shadows, but he saw the fierce glint in her eyes and the hard, pinched line of her mouth. She's not worth it, Francesca said. Nothing ever is. I want you to understand that, all right? It's a crap reason to throw your life away. Matthew dropped his eyes again, curling and uncurling his fingers. Everything was sharper, brighter, from the sound of chirping crickets to the early autumn chill on his skin. He took deep breaths, filling his lungs with fresh air. They still ached, but he couldn't get enough. He looked up at Francesca, at the full moon shining behind her, and nodded. The end. The end. Yay, I got through it. I didn't burst into flames. Thank you for listening.
And none of us burst into tears completely, I think, either. So wins all around, right?
What?
Well, not like, well. Okay.
Well, if that was the case, I would have brought my tear collecting bottle.
Oh yeah, pass those around at the live readings. That's always useful.
That's true.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely story. We've been having a very lively discussion about it in the chat that I'd love for you to check out.
I'm gonna have to look.
Yeah, you got us all thinking. We always need a breath in between.
Oh.
Let the story soak in. All right. We're ready now. Next up is Jordan Kurella. Jordan Kurella is a queer and disabled author who has lived all over the world, including Cairo and Chicago. In their past lives, they were a barista, a radio DJ, and a social worker. Their work can be found in Apex, Glitter and Ashes, and Strange Horizons. Jordan lives in Ohio with their perfect service dog and perfectly serviceable cat. Jordan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a little shorter piece today. It has yet to be published. I don't want to say never published. I don't want to say unpublished. It has yet to be published. So this is the first foray of it into the world. It is a story that I wrote as part of a writing exercise in Rambo Academy. I ran a class for Rambo Academy and we did a writing exercise, and this was part of what came out of it. And it's called Automagical Thinking, and it has content warnings for murder, profanity, and disposal of bodies. So we're going to start. Automagical Thinking by me, Jordan Kurella. Just let me move this. If I dump the body in the river, then things won't happen automatically. So I hope. Firstly, it took a hell of a lot of trouble to drag this body this far, especially for one guy and their bicycle. Secondly, effort requires forethought, and forethought is the point. Thirdly, too much happens automatically these days, and I'm tired of it. See, when I dump this body that I killed automatically, I'm making a choice that this body belongs in this river, damn it, and by hell or high water or low tide or high tide or however tides work, this choice is my choice, and I'm going to make a change, make waves, not ripples. I'm going to make a difference on purpose. Or am I? Fuck. Is there anything that even happens on purpose anymore? See, I learned in college that murder is a constant. My Russian lit professor taught me that via Raskolnikov. However, I don't think the takeaway of the class is supposed to be that murder is constant. I think the message we were supposed to get from crime and punishment was less crime, more punishment. But that's not how it worked out, not for anyone. Really, because when magic took over, anyone decided to hell with consequences, of course, we had to give it a name. Automatically, the United States government called it. They decided we are no longer responsible for our actions. Things just happen. Whoops, Sorry you got in the way of me knocking you off your bike there, Ashton. Well, me, Ashton, says, whoops, sorry about my fist in your face there, buddy. World is utter fucking chaos anyway. Sinkholes open and close overnight. The aurora borealis shows up wherever the fuck it wants to. And unicorns, they're a thing now everywhere. Automagical is the way of the world, and so is murder. It has to stop sometime, because let's be real, as much as I love unicorns, they're deadly motherfuckers, and so am I, having just escaped one. Unicorn, not a murderer. I was catching my breath at a dumpster, and this asshole has a gun on me so he can steal my wallet. So my mom always said, Ashton, never go anywhere unarmed. That's why I keep a hammer in my leather jacket. My hammer did hurt him. He's dead now. Checked his wallet. ID says Jesse Stewart, he, him. I know his address, so I can send an anonymous donation to his GoFundMe for funeral expenses. I also know how far away to dump his body in the river, so he'll be found by someone, who cares. All this was a choice. All this was on purpose. All this could have been avoided if it weren't for the fucking unicorns. But you know what? Revolution by Unicorn has a nice ring to it. Actually, so anyway, I've been sitting at the bank of this river for about an hour trying to make my choice, the one to dump the body. Jesse and I are shoulder to shoulder, head to head, thinking. Well, I'm thinking Jesse's dead. He pulled the gun on me automatically, and I slammed my hammer into him the same way. Murder is a constant when the world is all crime, no punishment. The aurora borealis didn't show up tonight. It's dark, storms coming, frogs are singing, grass is seeding, tickling my nose. All this is real. All this is bringing me to the fact that I'm still thinking about my choice, but not doing it. Why? Because choice is hard. Reacting is easier. And there's a cruelty to a body bashed in by a hammer and then dragged 4 miles through the dark, avoiding anything that walks, drives, or breathes just to get, I can't see the rest. Am I a cruel person? Am I that kind of person just to make waves, cause revolts? Am I that kind of guy? Turn Jesse's face so I can really look at it. His eyes are closed. I saw to that. Rain had cleaned his cheeks off of the blood and stuff. The weather saw to that. He looks kind of peaceful now that his hat is back on. So peaceful, in fact, I just sort of want to sit here with him in the tall grass as the storm rolls in. That's another choice. Not automagical at all. The thing about Raskolnikov is that he eventually feels guilty for killing Sonia. When I really looked at Jesse's face, at any face, for the first time in dozens of murders, I felt guilty too. I didn't like it. Made my heart squeeze like grapefruit, made my stomach twist like spaghetti. So as Jesse and I sit in the grass getting dumped on by an epic thunderstorm, I make my choice. I make a real choice, one I actually have to sit with till dawn. Jesse and me get a cab going downtown the next day. We don't have to go far, but I don't want to drag a body on no coffee. Your friend looks like shit, Cabby says automatically. Oh, he got hammered last night, I say on purpose. That's the life, isn't it? We ride in silence, both of us smelling rank and rancid, to a brick duplex with a gold garden plot outside and folding picnic chairs on both porches. It's nearly noon on a weekday, and I hope the fuck somebody's home. I pulled Jesse out with some talk about, come on, big guy, get moving, or something like that. I tip the cabbie and then carry Jesse up the stairs. Then I ring the bell on purpose and wait. The end.
Jordan, that was awesome.
Thank you.
I can't wait until we can read it too.
I'm thinking about, I'm gonna probably send it out a couple more places, I don't know. So
really wonderfully read too, and you're just a natural performer. It was fantastic.
thank you.
Very engaging.
Thank you.
Very engaging.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like it that tonight we had one like very quietly immersive reading and one more in your face grabby one. And they both worked so well.
Well,
And they both took us through death and water too.
I was going to say they both had bodies in rivers.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
this is definitely one of
you two
those.
may have planned that. You must have
It's gonna
planned
be a
that,
story
right?
where my mom is gonna go, oh God, what are they gonna say about you now?
Well, they're going to say, what an awesome story and what an awesome reading.
Yeah,
Obviously.
no one got murdered and eaten in some, weird ritual this time.
Well, I mean, you have to save cannibalism for special occasions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't afford to you can't afford to do cannibalism all the time.
Yeah, you can't have it in every story. It just
Yeah.
gets to be kind of tiresome after a while.
Yeah.
People are flipping through, oh yeah, they're the cannibals again. Yeah.
Mhm.
No, this was perfect. This was just what I needed tonight. Thank you both so much. Next week is also going to be a great night. We're going to have Ruth Joffrey and Steve Toes calling in from Munich. Everyone show up to support him at 4 a.m. local time.
Mhm.
So that's also going to be a great follow-on to this. And you can always go and check up on the upcoming schedule or find the links through to Facebook and Zoom at storyhour2020.com. And at our Facebook page, you can, of course, watch any of the year plus of story hours we have recorded, including this one, as many times as you want. So thank you all so much for joining us around the virtual campfire again tonight. It's been wonderful having you all at Story Hour. Thank you especially to Daniel Marcus for starting this in the first place. And we'll see you all next week, I hope. Good night.